Host Larry Ellison in studio with my brother Dr. Bradley. My co-host here is in studio along with our engineer Pastor Hobbs. Good morning, Pastor Hobbs. How are you, sir?
By the grace of God, phenomenal.
We're back. Look how quick that hour went by. We want to thank our sponsors, Guaranteed Rate Mortgage Company. For all your mortgage needs, give branch manager Cora Holbrook a call at area code 781-342-0252. Guaranteed Mortgage is located at 75 State Street in downtown Boston, Mass. Guaranteed Rate Mortgage Company, guaranteed to exceed your expectations. As folks, as we said in the other hour, the top of the 7 o'clock hour, that Guaranteed Rate Mortgage in conjunction with Mamleo is going to be offering free first-time homebuyer workshops today at Mamleo headquarters at 61 Columbia Road in Dorchester at 2 p.m. today. So stop by if you have any concerns or questions about mortgages. If you're looking to buy a house, the mortgage rates are changing. Cora and her team are just phenomenal experts in this field. So if you have any questions, like I said, there's going to be some free light refreshments served there today. So just stop by at 61 Columbia Road, Mamleo headquarters with Guaranteed Rate Mortgage today, offering free first-time home buyer workshops today. And also in our 9 o'clock hour, another story we're going to get into, this week I saw a report on where Boston's Inspectional Services, when it comes to black and brown people, reporting issues such as rodent problems and mold and issues, that it's not taken serious. The complaints don't get seen. It's a huge problem. Inspectional Services, when they were confronted with it, they said they had no comment at this time. And the reason why that's important, because our folks are the ones who suffer really from asthma and things like that, and those are the things that contribute to it. So we're going to talk about that in our 9 o'clock hour.
They have no comment.
They had no comment. The numbers were just astounding.
You're not supposed to know that. You caught me by surprise.
Right. Well, in the fact that it's being reported and they're just ignoring it, it's like you just have to live with that. Clearly it was racial. The reports in black and brown communities were not taking it serious. Mm-hmm. But if there's an infestation downtown, we
you folks should be used to it.
We even got Tom and Jerry out there trying to trying to put it down.
All right. Okay, I needed that. Tom and Jerry.
All right. So with that said, we're talking about William Monroe Trotter. A story here. Like I said, folks, I've driven by that school numerous times, and that's why I saw Pastor Karen was online. I'm like, wait, I remember going there. She worked at that school. She was a staff member there. And his history here in Boston, I had no idea, so I'm getting education. So we're going to continue with that at that segment there. When Pastor Hobbs is ready, he'll let me know. We'll continue from what we played in the 7 o'clock hour, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Would give him money as well. And so he would use that money to buy out black newspapers and then dictate to the editors of those newspapers what could be written about him, about Tuskegee, and also just about what was happening, horrendous events that were happening across the country in terms of white violence against black people. And so he purchased newspapers. He actually founded a newspaper in Boston that did not do very well, but actually lasted and became kind of the Booker T. Washington alternative to The Guardian. He tried to buy out and bankrupt The Guardian. It didn't work. But Booker T. Washington really used all of his resources to try to silence his critics.
Trotter over the years held lots of rallies and organized a lot of national conferences and co-founded a lot of national organizations with other leaders that, aspired to advance the cause of racial justice nationally. And many of them didn't last. One reason was Trotter's temperament, right? He wasn't such an easy guy to get along with.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. I always say when I give book talks that I don't imagine that Trotter would have been pleasant to be around more than, superficially. He was, first of all, horribly misogynistic, and I go into the book sort of his relationship to his wife and his sisters and his mother. And he was also somebody who was very uncompromising. And on one hand, that is remarkable in somebody who is out for the cause of justice. And so he received a lot of respect, and duly so, for his tenacity and his willingness to really confront the egregious, civil rights abuses and human abuses that were happening at the time. But that type of personality made him see the world as very confrontational, even amongst people who probably would have been amenable to his views, but who were turned off by his tendency to take things very personally. He definitely believed that the adage that we now take for granted, which is that the personal is political. And so he had a very hard time separating these spats that he would have, even with people who he knew well, like W.E.B. Du Bois, these spats that he had with them from their political commitment to black liberation.
You're right about his misogyny. I mean, he clearly felt women's role was to be soldiers in support of the cause. And the irony, of course, is that the women in his life were critical to keeping his newspaper, The Guardian, going.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things, like, I think it's, we see that in a lot of male activists, particularly, in the 20th century. But yes, he was married to an activist in her own right named Geraldine Pindell, another Bostonian, African-American. They married right before he started The Guardian. Deanie, as she was known, was somebody who sources point to, she was the one who ran the newspaper. So when you visited the Guardian office, she was the one who was there. She was the one who asked people for their money. She was the business-minded person behind it. The irony, of course, being that Deanie did a lot of her own civil rights work that Trotter was not even involved in, and that this became, he became the face, and yet she's the person who was behind the scenes doing a lot of the work.
So Trotter, throughout his period between 1901, when he formed the Guardian, and his death in the 1930s, advanced this agenda of mass activism to achieve change. The NAACP, the venerable civil rights organization, was formed in this period, I guess 1909. How did Trotter regard the organization and its approach?
It's a good question, because Trotter was friends with, allied with many of the African-American people who were at the initial meeting that led to the creation of the NAACP. What Trotter objected to was that the NAACP was founded as a white organization. It's founded by people like Mary White Ovington and others who were reformers, very sincere reformers, but people who had all of these paternalistic and racist views of black people and their potential as political actors for their own freedom. And so Trotter and others of his allies were appalled that this organization was created and that the white creators of the organization curated who the black people would be who would be there. They allowed W.E.B. Du Bois to be there, but he eventually became, for a long time, the only black the leadership position within the early NAACP, and that didn't really change until the 1920s. And so Trotter's criticism of the NAACP was that it was a white organization, as he said, for white interests. It was not a radical organization designed to foment protest against the racial conditions as they existed. And so he continued to run his Negro Independent Political League that really sought support from the black masses.
Carrie Greenidge is with us. Her book, Black Radical, The Life and Times of William Monroe Trotter, is available in hardback and is out in paperback this week. She'll talk more about Trotter's remarkable life and legacy after a short break. I'm Dave Davies, and this is Fresh Air.
If you ever wonder how the world's most successful leaders got to where they are, what struggles they faced, and what kept them going, there's a show for you. Each week on my new podcast, my guests reveal how to think more like a leader. Check out Wisdom from the Top from NPR and Luminary.
My guest is Tufts University history professor Carrie Greenidge. Her new book is about a fearless and influential activist who fought for black rights in the early 20th century. His weekly newspaper, The Guardian, published in Boston, advanced an agenda of federal laws for black voting rights and equal opportunity at a time many considered those ideas extreme. Greenidge's book is Black Radical, The Life and Times of William Monroe Trotter. He had a very well-known confrontation with President Woodrow Wilson in 1914. Before we get to that, maybe we should just talk a bit about his relationship with Wilson, because this is interesting. I mean, this is a guy, Trotter, who runs a weekly newspaper in Boston, but he was the kind of national figure that could get a meeting with the president in some cases. Wilson was a Democrat. Remember, most African Americans historically up to that point had supported the Republican Party. Give us a sense of what Trotter's relationship was with Wilson, what his hopes and expectations were from Wilson, and how Wilson dealt with the issue of race and segregation in the government.
Well, Woodrow Wilson, just to preface this by saying, was a virulent, unapologetic white supremacist, was somebody who directly believed that the South had been wronged during Civil War and Reconstruction, and that black people were sort of secondary to the American project. And this was not any secret when he was running for president. What Trotter reacted to, though, was that Woodrow Wilson emerged as a presidential candidate after over a decade of Republican rule in the White House. And underneath Trotter's scrutiny, Trotter would argue that that had been devastating to civil rights, despite the promises made during radical Reconstruction in the 1860s and 1870s. The fact that the Republican Party allied itself with Southern segregationists in an effort to build the party in the South. And so when Woodrow Wilson came along, Woodrow Wilson had one thing going for him, and that was that he did not have a history of being a nationally recognized Republican leader who had weighed into all these racial issues before. And so Trotter saw him and began to publish his newspaper and talk about, the platforms of the party, and was impressed by the fact that Woodrow Wilson in New Jersey, when he was governor, had met with black activists. And this was something that few governors did at the time. And Trotter was really impressed by the fact that these black activists in New Jersey had met with candidate Wilson. And so he organized a meeting with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, as the sort of skilled politician, basically said that he would be a Moses of the people, that he did not know what he felt about the racial issue, as he said, but that he believed in justice, which was, a pretty remarkable thing for any politician to say at the time. And so Trotter urged people to vote for the Democratic candidate. It was the only presidential candidate that he endorsed through the newspaper.
Right, he typically did not endorse candidates. And I guess this is another example of Trotter saying African Americans have to be smart and use their votes for leverage, and if one party has abandoned you, consider the other. So takes a chance on supporting Woodrow Wilson, and then what kind of record did Woodrow Wilson establish on the issue of race and segregation?
Well, Woodrow Wilson, right before he enters the White House, he entered the White House in March of 1913. And within a month, so by April 1913, he had invited avowed segregationists from across the South to be members of his cabinet. He had invited many of those people to help him institute segregation in the federal government in Washington, D.C. The federal government at the time was the one area that was not segregated. So if you served in Washington, D.C., if you went into one of the office buildings there, it was not a segregated office building. And this changed literally overnight. There's stories of black people showing up for work in the Treasury Department, and suddenly there's a white and colored sign that hadn't been there on Monday. It's sort of very, very drastic thing that suddenly happened. He also allied himself with people who had supported or at least downplayed lynching in their own states. And when this happened, Trotter immediately sent him a telegram saying, "Can I speak with you?" Of course, Woodrow Wilson is president. At first he said no, and then eventually he arranges through a series of congressmen to meet with Trotter and his supporters in 1914.
Right, and this ended up being an explosive confrontation. Tell us what happened.
This is at a time when no president has met with a group of black people who are coming to the president as voters who are concerned. And they're approaching a man, Woodrow Wilson, who, when he met with them, at first approaches their meeting as politicians tend to do, which is that, I'm so sorry, I think we've misunderstood each other, I appreciate your concern, and then send you on your way. Trotter refused to take that as an answer. He came back a second time with another group. He basically said that what Woodrow Wilson was doing was betraying the people who had gotten him into office, and that may sound hyperbolic, but it actually, historical voting evidence would say that in certain northern states, the black vote was the one that tipped that state towards Woodrow Wilson. So he was very confrontational, and Wilson basically approached Trotter as somebody who had talked in a impertinent tone, was his way of saying it. And he basically said that, segregation was not discrimination. Black people should take it as a compliment that they were being segregated in the federal government. And he then basically kicked Trotter out of the meeting. And so it was a very dramatic moment for Trotter, and a very dramatic one for African American people who were following this, of course, in the newspaper, and were impressed, proud that somebody had approached a sitting American president and held them to account for their racial policy.
Right, and it really increased his national standing, didn't it, Trotters?
Yes. After this, he was asked to speak places across the country. The black community in D.C. had all these rousing supports for him. He publicly apologized and took responsibility for encouraging black people to vote for somebody who had turned out to be a betrayal of civil rights rhetoric. So this was definitely a turning point in terms of his populist appeal.
We need to take a break here. Let me reintroduce you once again. Carrie Greenidge is a historian who teaches at Tufts University. Her new book is Black Radical, The Life and Times of William Monroe Trotter. We'll talk more after this short break. This is Fresh Air.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from E-Trade. You want to invest your money, but there's one problem. You're not sure where to begin. Luckily, there's E-Trade, who offers more than just trading. E-Trade simplifies investing without the financial jargon and has the people to offer guidance and support to make your money work hard for you. For more information, visit etrade.com/NPR. E-Trade Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC.
With civil unrest, the pandemic, and the economic crisis, you want to know what's happening right when you wake up. And that's why there is Up First, the news you need in about 10 minutes from NPR News. Listen every day.
This is Fresh Air, and we're speaking with historian Carrie Greenidge. Her new book focuses on the life of William Monroe Trotter, an African-American publisher and activist who was an influential crusader for civil rights in the early 20th century. His weekly newspaper, based in Boston, was called The Guardian. Greenidge's book is Black Radical, The Life and Times of William Monroe Trotter. Another event that Trotter became deeply involved in was the release in 1915 of the film Birth of a Nation, which had all kinds of racist portrayals of African Americans during Reconstruction, portraying them played by white actors in blackface as, aggressive and menacing, and it treats the Ku Klux Klan as a heroic force. What did Trotter do in response to the release of this film?
The Birth of a Nation came out in 1915. It was based on the series of books that were written by a segregationist in the early 1900s. They were extremely popular, those books. The film, when it came out, was the first long-form film and was hugely successful. It was the first time most Americans had seen a film as we would think of it today, that has like a plot and it has actors and actresses and it has scenes and all that type of thing. So Trotter understood when it was released that this was going to shape the way that people understood politics and understood specifically the role of black people in the Republic for generations to come, and that was going to affect policy, how people passed laws, how people, taught history in schools. And so he was adamant that the film was dangerous. And he actually was proven right. We know that when the Birth of a Nation premiered in Georgia, that it gave rise to the new Ku Klux Klan in Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1915. So he was not wrong. And he really believed that this film was not just about censorship. It was more about preventing this pervasive racist propaganda from slipping into the American society.
So how did he organize around it?
Well, the first thing he did was he met with the governor of Massachusetts and the mayor of Boston to try to get the film banned. Ironically, this is at a time when Boston was known as a city that was puritanical in its beliefs on public entertainment. So they banned everything from, classical music performances to, stage plays. And so he was asking Boston to live up to that reputation and to ban the film. And of course, Boston refused to do so. And so he would stage mass protests in which black people and some white allies would show up in the theaters and then disrupt the showing of the film. He staged a massive protest outside the Massachusetts State House in which he and members of the local NAACP met with the governor to try to get the film banned or get it censored. And when that didn't work, the crowd ended up going into movie theaters and preventing the film from being shown. So it really was this massive protest within the streets as well as protests through the courts.
After World War I, it was a time of enormous mob violence of whites against blacks in many cities. Chicago, there was a huge riot. There was Tulsa, Oklahoma, where an entire community was destroyed. And Trotter came to embrace the idea of armed black resistance. He helped form a group called the African Blood Brothership to advance that idea. What was the idea? What was its impact?
So Trotter, by 1919, during the horrible Red Summer of 1919, came to believe, like many of his younger supporters, that African Americans had to bear arms to protect themselves and their communities from what was a resurgence of violence. Elaine, Arkansas, Chicago, Boston, New York, all of these cities are just erupting in white violence against black people, many of whom were still in their World War I uniform. So this is right after World War I. And so Trotter met with many of his allies who were socialists, Marxists, trade unionists, and began to really study this idea of the roles that violence and armed resistance could play in black protest. He also began to read a lot of literature around anti-colonialism and the role of continental Africa's claims to power and resistance to colonial powers in Africa. And through that, he began to adopt this idea that black people needed to arm themselves. He also took a lot of lessons from what was going on in Ireland in terms of people arming themselves against the British. And so he really saw this as part of a long tradition of oppressed people using their right to bear arms to rise up against their oppressors.
Well, this is exactly the kind of debate that comes up in many movements for social change. What's your take? Did it work? Was it effective? Did it make a difference?
I would say that the effect and the difference that it made was galvanizing, inspiring black communities themselves to see and reclaim the power that they did have where they have it. So one of the things you mentioned, Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the reasons that the black community, that particular moment of horrendous violence was so shocking was that the black community in Tulsa was a community that was thriving. It was a community that was doing well economically. It was a community that, if you were to make the conservative argument that all black people need to do is pick themselves up by their bootstraps, well, Tulsa was it. And then Tulsa, there was this coordinated, very violent white supremacist attack on black Tulsans. And because of the African Blood Brotherhood, which had a branch in Tulsa, many members of that black community did arm themselves and protect themselves from this white assault, and were unapologetic about it. We're saying that they were protecting their families, they were protecting their property, and they were protecting their lives. And so I would say that sort of glimpse of the possibilities for black people to realize and to claim their right to exist, I would say, is very, very powerful in terms of Trotter and the ABB. In terms of, I think sometimes we, and I include myself in this, get kind of stuck on, well, did racism end? And the answer, of course, is no. But in terms of challenging the ground upon which claims to racial justice were made, definitely this approach changed the terms under which black people operated.
There's this theme that runs through this period of, Trotter saying, mass activity, an aggressive agenda of change is the way to do things. Others, Booker T. Washington, say the NAACP, saying you can't get too far out in front. You've got to accept compromise. You've got to take a step at a time. I'm wondering what your take. I mean, like the NAACP focused a lot on lawsuits and, administrative changing. I mean, was there a place for both? Should they have worked together more?
I would say that the historical record and the record of somebody like Trotter would say that absolutely movements need radical mass action in order to receive or propel or inspire systemic change. The NAACP ended up, by the 1920s, becoming an organization that recruited and formed a base amongst African American people in the South. I would not say there's no evidence that Trotter was directly responsible for that decision, but I would say that the idea that black people themselves felt so disconnected, the masses of black people, from the NAACP, was something that the NAACP struggled with, and amended by, getting black leaders like James Weldon Johnson, leaders in the movement, to bring in black people. That's a very Trotter way of looking at things, that you have to organize black people where they are. There's no way that you're going to eradicate racism or bring about justice if it's people dictating to black communities what they should do. So I would say that has proven to be valuable. I will say that, we tend to get caught up in this false dichotomy between, radical protest versus, progressive, change. And they have to exist at the same time, and radical change has to be the barometer through which we make racial progress. Because in Trotter's case, many of the things that were considered radical at his time are no longer considered radical now. The whole idea that black people should be, that lynching should be a federal crime. The whole idea that black people who perform labor should be paid equally as white people who perform the same labor. All of those things are now considered pretty mainstream. And so that isn't to say that he wasn't radical. It's to say that because of his radicalism and his belief in the fact that black people should be deciding these terms for themselves, it's paved the way now for black people and disenfranchised people to make claims that the rest of the world, progressives included, see as taking it too far.
It's interesting. Most of us don't know about him, and maybe that's partly because he didn't write a memoir and didn't give interviews much, and he didn't have children, so there weren't people writing about him. What is his legacy, his impact, do you think?
I think his impact is daring the black community, both at home and I would argue globally, to decide for themselves and demand for themselves what liberation looks like, and not allowing outside people or even self-interested members of your own community dictate what liberation should look like. I think that's a very powerful way of looking at justice that someone like Trotter really introduced to his readers and definitely to the country.
Well, Carrie Greenidge, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much, and this was lovely.
All right, there you have it.
That's quite an education.
Yeah, but it's a lot to unpack, Dr. Bradley. I always enjoy this book. You know what I enjoy more than that? Watching your reaction to these pieces, right?
Wow.
So let's unpack that. So today in America, this is what they say about history repeating. Folks, again, you're listening to At the Round Table with Mamley. I'm your host, Larry Ellison. In studio, my brother, my co-host, Dr. Bradley, is in the house here to give you a checkup from the NECA. We're listening to an interview with Carrie Greenidge. She is a professor at Tufts University. She wrote the book Black Radical, which I have on order, waiting for it to arrive. I am waiting to read that book from cover to cover. And the reason why we played that in 2 segments, it's a long segment, but it was worth listening to. A lot of history there.
Actually, a lot of history there. Number one, he didn't have any kids. He didn't write a memoir. So we don't really know about him.
Right.
And there's a lot there to know. And even myself, a student of history, I'm actively searching out who should I research, for lack of a better term, just to know more about my people, more about the contributions that we have made to America, and this is a very interesting individual. I will definitely get this book. I will definitely read it. I will definitely highlight it. I will definitely make my little margins, my little notes in the margins, just to make sure that I'm aware of the contributions that he made.
He's local.
Yes.
Right. So let's unpack that. And folks, we want to get your take on this. So give us a call if you want. 617-282-0685. 617-282-0685. I'm talking about William Monroe Trotter. Like I said, I've driven by that building numerous times. I pass it because coming into work, my streets are one way to come in. So I go by that school every day that I'm working.
Is the school open?
It is open.
It's open. It's open today.
It's open. It's on Humboldt Avenue.
My wife went there for grade school. I'm wondering, what do they know about him? The individuals who are running the school. What do they have up in the school as a memorial to him?
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop by this week and ask the principal what she knows and if she'd be willing to come on the broadcast and talk to us about it.
That's a good point.
Right. And talk to us about it.
We need to get these type of stories out to our people. They need to know the contributions that we have made. This is good stuff.
But let's unpack this for a second, Dr. Bradley. So, Birth of a Nation, right? That removes race. Yeah. But yet they're saying in this country today they want to ban books in schools, and they want to right. All right. Okay.
Good connection.
Okay.
Good connection.
Right. Okay. Voting rights. Back then they saw radical. What are they saying today? They want to get rid of voting rights because they think they're radical, right? The Tulsa Massacre, right? So there's so much here that he was actually forward in his thinking and his approach to things, right? And we've regressed, right? Mm-hmm. This is why I've always said, right? And you and I myself, I don't belong to any political party, right? Because we see that it doesn't matter what letter is beside them. Mm-hmm. It is what are they doing, right? Mm-hmm. Because back then, most black people voted Republicans, right? And now they pretty much vote Democrat because of the letter, not because of anything that they're doing for the most part.
Well, in fact, from the Reconstruction up to I would say, the Civil Rights Movement, black people were pretty much Republicans. Right. And then after the Southern Compromise, Republicans shift to entertain the racism around white individuals in the South who was really concerned about black progress, and then the shift. And now most black people are going through as Democrat. Actually, if you think about it, and I mentioned this last week, I think it's time for our own party, to be honest with you, because neither one is really doing anything for us that relates to moving the project forward,
reclaiming the power that we have.
Yes.
Right. She said it right there. Yeah. He was saying reclaim the power that we have. So absolutely, this is not a reinvention of the wheel. This is just when we haven't been paying attention.
We haven't been paying attention on a lot of fronts, though, Larry. Because one of the things that I have always complained about is that we do not understand the power of our buying power.
Right.
We tend to buy. We don't flip the dollar over. Right. That was the beauty of Rosewood. Right. That was the beauty of Tulsa.
Right.
Is that the money flipped over 30 times, 20 to 30 times in the community before it left the community. Right. And most other communities are doing that. Right. But we tend not to do it. We think the ice is colder because it's coming from a white guy as opposed to coming from a black guy.
Right. And ice is ice.
Ice is ice. I mean, come on. We have to think about what we're spending our money on and who we're spending our money with.
You go back and think about, we were fighting for freedom. We were fighting for our rights. And you see folks who attacked the Capitol on January 6th claiming they were fighting for their rights. They were fighting because they want to, in my opinion, oppress a certain segment of the population, right? That they are in fear. And yet when other folks are just fighting for, like in Ukraine, as Pastor Karen said, is these folks tasted freedom and they don't want to give it up, and I don't blame them.
They're willing to die for it.
And we should have that same attitude. Is that I'm not giving up my freedom, and I'm willing to die for it. And that's not something I say lightly, because I'm not going back to being treated as someone who's like, I'm not looking for acceptance. It's just like the police last week, the interview we played on, the young lady that she's not looking to assimilate anyone. She realized she's never going to be accepted.
I want to integrate.
Right, integrate. She's never going to be accepted, and she's realized. She's tried, and then she thought it was a compliment to be saying that she talks like she's white, and she realized when she was getting it from other folks, it was an insult, right? And that no matter what she did when she went into that restaurant, they thought she was the help. When Clarence Thomas, his first day at the Supreme Court, the guy's out. Hey, what are you doing?
You can't park there.
Right. What are you doing here?
It doesn't influence how he votes.
Right. It doesn't. And exactly. Wow. Exactly. That it doesn't matter. He could. Well, how hard it would have been to ask him, sir, you work here? That's not offensive. Because he doesn't know you, right? He maybe hasn't watched the nomination, right?
Exactly.
But the assumption is you must be out of place here.
You shouldn't be in this orbit. You should be in this social orbit. You shouldn't. You should be navigating
here. Don't belong here.
Don't belong here.
Right. And even over the years, when black people have built up their Tulsa, like I said, is a perfect example. And there was a place in New Jersey that was very similar because back then we could not go into white America and do business. They wouldn't do business. So we set up our own infrastructures. They became successful because that's what they said, the boycotts, the bus boycotts, and what you've said so eloquently on this show many a times, it's the green. Doesn't matter what color. As long as your money is green, right?
Well, listen, I mean, you look at the boycott, the bus boycott in Birmingham.
Right.
I mean, it took a couple of years, but because black people said, I'm not riding.
Hello.
I walk 2 miles.
Lunch count. Right.
Look at the lunch counter.
Right.
I mean, when they put their feet down and said, I am not doing it.
Right.
And so it's all about the dollar.
As long as we were willing to put our money on the bus and sit in the back of it,
we're okay.
Right. Well, we said, fine, we won't ride your bus. We're not going to ride your bus. And our money's not going to ride your bus.
Brought it to the brink of collapse.
Exactly.
Right to almost to collapsed the entire thing, and
the people at the back of the bus pay the same fares as the people in the front of the bus.
Exactly.
And when your own bus is only half full,
that's right.
You can't survive.
That's right.
You cannot survive
because those expenses are not going anywhere. You better bring in the income to meet those expenses.
That's right.
You got to have access to meet
Dr.
those.
Dr. Burley, why are we? This is why I try when I hear things that I segments like this. I think it's important to bring to our audience is that why are we're doomed to history because we're repeating it and we haven't learned. A lot of us haven't learned from it. What they're talking about back then?
Because we don't seek out our own history, Larry. When we don't seek out our own history, we allow other people to tell us what contribution that we made and did not make. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we can be told that all we are consumers. Right. We're not necessarily contributing to the society. We're just taking away, and that is far, far from truth.
Right.
And so we need to, number one, it starts in our home. We need to start educating ourselves, educating our kids, and number two, we have to walk around here like we belong because we do.
Well, like I said, she said,
we belong.
We have to reclaim the power that we have.
Yes.
It's just that Globe article. You think would have been a wake up call, and it's been over 10 years now since that came out about the net worth of black $8, white family $2. I can guarantee you that net gain for wealth for black family hasn't increased much, but I got on the other side, it is projected because we know what prices of homes are. Let's hit these callers.
I just got measured low. I was like, wow, where's that come from?
I'm looking at mine like, it means the taxes are going.
That's exactly what that means.
Good morning, caller. Welcome to the round table.
Good morning. I'm calling just to compliment the both of you. This is a great education you're giving to the people of Boston. Hopefully people are listening and they understand that the legacy of struggle for people of color in the city of Boston goes back centuries.
Absolutely, Counselor. And thank you, Counselor Yancey, for those who know that voice. We know it quite well. Yes. Counselor Yancey, who you've been a student of that, and you've also when you're in the council and even out of the council, you've always tried to educate people and you're giving away the books with this knowledge in there, right? And also educating folks at every level of government and understanding that and making sure that we weren't repeating it. And folks didn't pay attention. And I think that's a big reason why we're suffering from history repeating itself today. A lot of these things that were talked about in that interview, we thought we would have learned our lessons, and yet we're not. We're still in the same condition that we were. Probably worse, Counselor.
Well, William Monroe Trotter was a very frustrated black man. Partly because of he saw all around him people who were accommodating themselves to a very racist environment, and in some ways simulating and even imitating some of the worst of the white racist mentality against our folks. William Monroe Trotter, as you probably know, had a home in Dorchester on Sawyer Avenue.
Yeah, 97 Sawyer Ave.
And he died very mysteriously at the end of his life. I don't have all the details of it, but it's something worth researching as well. He was not as celebrated as so many other intellectuals were. W.E.B. Du Bois was another great intellectual coming out of the black community, and he was around the same time as William Monroe Trotter and Booker T. Washington, and often had critical debates with Booker T. Washington, and he was more like a William Monroe Trotter. They separated on some issues, and W.B. Du Bois, who lived to be 99 years old, who died just the day before the Great March on Washington in 1963, had gone through a lot of changes in his many decades of struggle as well. Much of it right here in the city of Boston. So Boston does have that legacy of struggle. And one of the things I attempted to do while I was on the council, virtually every meeting I celebrated and honored people who've passed and those who are still among us. On a weekly basis, we had what's known as the resolutions and accommodations, etc. And I would certainly try in my own way to educate my colleagues in the larger city of Boston, people of all races, that we are here, and we are strong, and we are very much aware of the disparities that exist, and we do everything we can in our own way to try to attack the problem. But William Monroe Trotter is somebody who should be celebrated. We should have a statue of William Monroe Trotter, Malcolm X, as well as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. right there on City Hall Plaza. So the decision makers can be reminded every day.
Right. He was initial, in my opinion, of Black Lives Matter. He was behind the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of the stuff we're doing now is repeating it. And it's the Dr. Bryce, before we grab this other call, and Counsel, I want you to stand by, is that a family from Germany bought that home on Sawyer Ave, and they didn't know the history of it. And once they found out, they opened their home up to the public to come in there, and they restored it and educate a family from Germany, not someone local, but a family from Germany took more of an interest in this.
Yeah, I think it's a historical landmark of 1976. I think it became a historical landmark because of the association with Trotter.
The information of him, that's why
it's amazing.
It's fun. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the roundtable.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dick.
Yeah, both of your points are very well respected and made, but the problem I had is like what Malcolm X said, and I'm going to screw up his original quote: only a fool will allow his something to be educated by someone, no? I mean, I'm sorry, only a fool will allow his kids to be educated by the oppressor. And that's what we have now, because I see that, don't get me wrong, the Baltimore School, even though with all its problems, it hasn't even been fixed yet, still has that mentality of allowing black kids to be educated by the system that has, first and foremost, had hidden our history from us for such a very long time.
Well, Dick, hold on 1 second, because I want to pivot to Counselor Yancey on what you're saying, because, Counselor, to Dick's point, before busing, I know I was in the school, it was predominantly black, it was right around the corner from my house, and most of the teachers look like me, the community. Do you feel, to Dick's point he's making there about the education piece, do you think that was a big change in the decline in the education here? Is it what he's talking about, is being educated by your own?
Well, I think it's a excellent point and issue to be discussed and to think about. I walked to my high school, but my high school was 99% white.
Oh, okay.
In the heart of Roxbury.
Okay.
It was Boston Technical High School. Boston Latin Academy is located right
where my office is. Yes, right.
And I lived on 7th Street, just a block away. So even though it was an exam school, I had the opportunity to walk to school. And I certainly am one who opposed the whole idea of segregated education, and realized at an early age that Deacon's point is well taken, because when the issue of slavery arose when I was in elementary school, it was treated as if it was a very benevolent institution that helped civilize black folks. And that's in the Boston public school system. So his point is well taken. On the other hand, I also urge people to walk around this town like they own it.
Well, that's what she says in here.
African Americans have a great legacy here, and we should be in a more powerful position to dictate what happens within our school system.
Right.
With the appointed school board, of course, that's less likely, and that's why we have to attack that issue as well.
Well, that's what in the segment there, what she said. He said reclaim the power that we have, right? And as I was saying, like they want to ban books in schools, certain books, right? But yet, the Birth of a Nation, people are right to that. They want to water down and rid black people in particular from their voting rights. We saw the massacre in Tulsa, so we're seeing a shift to the back in the George Wallace era and things like even the Woodrow Wilson. I mean, it's just amazing how when you look at that time, that we're now just in a modern day version of it, and that people are shifting women's rights, things that we thought were settled law in this country, now that the courts are being stacked in a different way, that now we want to undo them because other folks don't like them. It's just mind-boggling. And you say, I feel like we're sitting on the sideline as spectators, because I said to folks when the Black Lives Matter protests, I said, this is not a movement, it's a moment, right? And if you look out in the suburbs now, as I drive through some of those neighborhoods, I see the signs of fading, and that's the commitment is fading. That putting a sign in their yard was
That's the commitment to it.
right, exactly.
That's what they're doing about the issue.
But their neighbors
yard.
don't look like me.
No.
If there's very few of us, so
I think we have to also be mindful of the exclusionary doctrine, the doctrine of exclusion.
Yeah.
Be mindful of the fact that our institutions were built with the understanding that black people will not benefit from the fruits of white society. When you think about that and you start looking at these institutions around education, housing, medical, all that's the objective. And so we can't lose sight of that as black people.
So Councilor Yancey also, Dick Holt, stand by as well. In their piece, she talked about, that back. I mean, I'm trying to calculate it, and my wife is the math person in the household. That his father left him $20,000 back then. $20,000 is a lot of money today, but back in that time, a black person with $20,000 was well off. He invested that in trying to educate. I'm looking at almost like the modern day version of the Bay State Banner, where he had a newspaper, The Guardian, that he started, and he put his own money into. He could have just said, "Hey, I have mine. Good luck, the rest of you."
Which is what a lot of us do.
Exactly.
Your point is well taken. $20,000 at the turn of the last century was probably the equivalent of in excess of $500,000, if not $1 million, because of inflation, etc. But I think that what he exemplified is real sacrifice.
Exactly. That's like yourself. No, really.
His frustration was that he also was marginalized, and he was not given the attention of a Booker T. Washington.
Sounds like a Councilor Yancey in the council.
Well, it sounds like Mamleo, because Mamleo had, under your leadership, especially Detective Ellison, exemplified some of the same struggles that William Monroe Trotter had to contend when he was alive. And I don't think that we can afford simply to say that we do not have the power to change what's going on, because you play into the hand of those who are currently oppressing us. We have to get more involved, not less involved. We have to not just vote during every election, but we have to continue to educate and organize not only our community, but others, and exercise some leadership.
Right.
I was a student at Tufts University in the 60s. There were only 5 African Americans in my class, but we came together, we founded the Afro-American Society, and by the time we graduated in 1970, we had organized several demonstrations, shut down the university at one point, and achieved many concessions from the administration of Tufts University, to the point that the following 400 African-American students. And that was a real success story. We haven't really told it yet, but people like George Cox and others who are no longer with us participate in those efforts. And we organized the white students as well. And when we shut down the construction site, constructing a new dorm back in 1969 at Tufts University, as well as the New England Medical Center in downtown Boston, we organized the white students to serve as a buffer on the construction site that we had shut down, and they joined us in the struggle, but we had to exercise the leadership.
Right. So, Dicko, before we let you go, now what are you going to do with this history that you're learning here this morning? Because it's one thing to listen to it, but it's another to act on it. What are your plans? I mean, does this change any of your thought process in helping and trying to motivate other folks to understand the importance and the sense of urgency on where we are today as people, as black people?
Well, first and foremost, it's going to make me do a lot of research on the man, which a lot of people in Boston don't know, William Trotter. And second, I respectfully would have to push back on the counselor, on when it comes to political power, because last time I checked, it's a two-way street, because we as the people got to hold our politicians accountable. It's not like we just vote for them because they look like us, but at the same time, we got to make sure that they have a black agenda for us. We as the people have to ask, what is your black agenda? Are you going to help black people? And there's no answer to that question that which are two tough questions, then I, as a voter, will never vote for them. I don't care. They could be the best black person in the world or the worst black person in the world. But if they don't have our agenda in mind, then guess what? They're just another so-called black person so-called black person in blackface. And one quick question. Are you going to have the homo...
Yes, today from 2 o'clock at Manley or 61 Columbia Road. Yes, we are.
So it's from 2 to 6?
No, 2 p.m. And it'll finish up, but it'll start at 2 o'clock. So stop on by at 61 Columbia Road.
Okay.
All right. We'll make the announcement again at the top of the hour. Thank you, Dicko, as well. I'm going to bring another call into this conversation. Good morning, Siddiqui. Dr. Bradley's over here hiding under the table. I told him you were on the line.
Well, look, he can do all the hiding he wants.
Where you go? What's the nickname you have for him?
Well, he's what's the name? I call him Fleming because
Fleming.
Way back.
Why? Because he eats at the steakhouse.
No, that's a family.
Yeah,
he knows that name. He knows me back from the day.
Yeah, I used to look up to him when I was a child.
Well, you were a short guy then. Huh? What's on your mind this morning, Siddiqui?
Yeah, I was just going to look. This is a very interesting show, and I hope there's young people listening.
Yeah.
But and I'm glad you got Councilor Yancey on there because it's kind of related to his presence. Is that and just in terms of Trotter and what he tried to do for black people, seeking power for black people, and then I wanted to bring it to today, and we've got Mayor Wu and they're highlighting these appointments downtown, but what I'm finding is that it's not playing out to any advantages to the community per se. Like for instance, like I direct the Black Community Information Center, and we've got the coalition, the Nubian Square Coalition, and we've been advocating for the Nubian Library name. And the mayor, when she was running for mayor, said she absolutely supports it. We've been reaching out to her, silence. I've talked to folks who are members of a coalition of neighborhood association groups who are concerned around the Parcel 3 process and other issues and regarding the land in our community. No response. So I'm just thinking, when we had a Charles Yancey, Chuck Turner, Gloria Foxes, we could reach out and get a response, but what's happening right now is complete silence.
Well,
like when I hear the whole thing about the appointment of the commissioner for black boys and men, that's a symbolic.
Well, let me just because we're up on this o'clock.
Okay,
no. Stand by, Siddiqui, because I want to get Council Yancey's responses, but I want to highlight this as well. Like I was talking earlier, I don't know if you heard it. Yesterday there was a young lady, and I forget her name. She was out in Lowell. She was appointed as the inclusion and diversity individual out there, and she resigned because she said all it was designed for was for her to have a job. Right, that's what they're putting black people in these positions so they can say they have one. It checks a box, but she's not allowed to do. Power. Right, they're not moving the needle. And Councilor Yancey, because I know you have many times have looked at the employment in the city of Boston and really what are the major jobs where you could actually make more than just a living, and you always pointed that out. And I'm just wondering, do you think our situation has bettered since you left the council in those issues that you constantly were addressing? And Siddiqui speaks to.
Let me say that there are many elected officials, black and white, Asian, and others who have given lip service to those issues.
Well, we've got 2 minutes, gentlemen, so I just want
they've given lip service, and that's a start, I suppose. But I happen to agree with Siddiqui that in terms of real substantive progress, we are going backwards in spite of the increased
backwards would be an improvement
in the elected officials. Now that can change, and I'm very optimistic that at some point, hopefully soon, we can translate the rhetoric into some reality, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. All right. No, we're not. And gentlemen, speaking of that, in our 9 o'clock hour, we're going to talk about I just recently said Boston Inspection Services is not taking serious complaints from black people in the community when it comes to mold and rat infestation in our communities. That the reports, and it's basically on racial lines that the report came out with another NPR story. I mean, this is just the disparities. This is how we are the biggest folks who are affected by asthma and things like that, and rodents and mold clearly attribute to those health disparities there. City Council Yancey, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to hear from you. I tell you, we've had all the heavyweights in this morning. Bishop Dickerson, Pastor Karen, I know, Siddiqui. We feel very honored to have such a star lineup of folks calling in, because there's a wealth of information there, and we thank you all. And
we thank you.
We appreciate you.
To give you added encouragement.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Siddiqui, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, tell these elected officials to stop hiding.
I think there's a couple under the table. Hey, Siddiqui said, get out of it. Get out of it. Thank you, sir.
Be doing yourself. Get out.
We've been listening to At the Round Table with Dr. Bradley. Before we go, I said to you, before the broadcast, you're going to say, you always say at the end, wow, where did the time go, right?
Yeah, it's flying.
It's just 2 hours gone.
It's already. Yeah.
And you haven't even blinked yet.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a break. You're listening At the Round Table with Man. We'll be right back.
It ain't a challenge if your music reflects who you are, then you's a coward. I can see through the lies you ain't living what you spitting. If your money's so long, why your dog's in prison? Why your baby mom's stripping? Why your mom's still living in that same broken home that you used to sell piffin'? You ain't gotta lie to me to sell me a track. You ain't gotta rock fake jewels or walk around strap. I respect artists getting money, but love them for spitting crack. And the fact that one track can move a family out the trap. It's a dream for us lost souls brought up in the mix. I'm motivated by the artists coming out in my midst, and the artists that paved the way when I didn't exist. Music's a skyscraper, I'm just trying to add a couple bricks.
This is for the dreamers. They say I am a dreamer, 'cause I still believe that anything is possible as long as you work hard. Hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle so if I never see ya, never get the chance to meet ya, no, I came up from the bottom, always rooting for the underdog.
I always dreamed I'd be on tour, instead of laying dealers on the floor, sitting in the hole.
Listening to WBPG LP 102.9 FM radio in Boston. We are located at 670 Washington Street in Dorchester, Massachusetts, zip code 02124. We are on this FM station from 2 a.m. to 9 a.m. Monday through Saturday, and 2 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sundays. Although we will be off of the FM signal until tomorrow, we will still be on the internet, television, and social media. Keep watching and listening to us throughout the day on www.bostonpraiseradio.tv, Roku TV, Apple TV, Shellcast Internet Radio, TuneIn Internet Radio, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, Audio Now, and 21 other media outlets. Praise Radio, the voice of the church in New England. The views and opinions